So before I start this talk, I just kind of want to give a bit of a disclaimer in that I'm not an expert, I'm not a theoretical physicist, I am not a Buddhist nun. All of the things that I'm going to be talking about are things that I've learned through my own personal experience, and I wanted to share it back with you. And it's something that I have been thinking about quite a lot. So, as some of you know, I went out to India in October on a 10-day retreat where I was learning about Buddhism and deepening my meditation practice. The retreat, the whole 10 days was conducted in silence, apart from when we had an hour's discussion on 6 of those days. The teacher would set us questions and we would answer them in our discussion groups, and also had the opportunity to ask the teacher questions at the end of each teaching session. And many people have come up to me after, since I've come back, to ask me, what was that like? And they're a bit incredulous around being able to last a whole 10 days without talking. This is someone who talks to themselves quite often. So to be honest, I went into that thinking this is going to be really, really tough. Whole 10 days, no mobile phone, no other electronic equipment. It all went in the safe. And no talking to anybody. And on the very first day when we were registering, the Buddhist nun who was administering that even said to us, like, if there's anybody here who feels that they can't last the whole 10 days, then consider giving up your place, because there are people on the waiting list. So I did have those doubts going through my mind, even if I could last it. But I did, entered into the retreat, stuck it out. The first day was really tough because I wanted to talk to my fellow students. So if we were passing each other by the gompa or standing in the lunch queue, you'd want to say hello or even thank you when they were passing the ladle for soup. My mind was constantly chattering away to itself as well. I went to bed on the first day, and when I woke up on the second day, I felt different. I felt like there was a real peace within me. So when it got to the end of the retreat and the end of the 10 days, I didn't want to start talking again at all. So what happens when you don't talk is that you start to notice more what goes on around you. And it was on day 6 when I was sitting on the steps outside the gompa. After lunch, I closed my eyes and I could just feel the sun hot on my face and hear the monkeys playing in the trees, chattering away to one another, and the crickets, a bit of background noise. And I could hear Yeshi, which was one of the resident dogs there, just walking along, the rap tap of her claws on the path, lots of sniffing, and the hard, cool step beneath me with the gritty sand texture. I was present. I was living in that moment without any grasping for the future and what may have come ahead, worrying about what was around the corner, or even grasping for the past and what had gone before, things that I could have done differently. I was just being in the now. I can actually do my paper. And it was giving up the need to talk that brought that to me. So before we go any further, in true Caroline style, I'm going to get you all to do a little meditation. This meditation is a bit different from what you may be used to. So if you've used apps like Headspace or Calm, you'll be used to using the breath as the object of focus. Well, on the retreat, the object that we were using quite commonly in the shamatha meditation that we were doing was actually to focus on being aware of being aware. So we're going to do 5 minutes of that now. What I would say as well is that this meditation is most effective if you keep your eyes open, but focus down, either on the floor or an object in front of you. So being aware of being aware. Cool. So this isn't a talk about meditation. I have actually done that one before, but I wanted to bring you into the now for the rest of the talk. That's a really good meditation to do if you want to become more aware and increase your concentration and focus as well. So this is a talk about time. What is time? And that's a question that has concerned people throughout history. So we're going to start with Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosophers. Aristotle described his concept of what time is in his book, Physics. He considered that the natural world as being subject to transformation and changes, and time and change are very closely related to each other. Time can be interpreted in regards to change, but not the other way around. And time is not a kind of motion, but rather existing on its own right. Rather, it is the amount of motion in respect of before and after. So time for Aristotle was a global order by which all things related to each other. And there are three states of time: past, present, and future. And the past is gone and no longer exists, and the future is yet to come and therefore yet to exist. So the present is the boundary between the past and the future and is not yet regarded as time, so it is volatile and transient. And this caused issues for St. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, who critiqued Aristotle's view, stating that if time is supposed to be composed of parts that don't exist, like the past and the future, then that thing itself cannot exist, nor have substance. So he drew the conclusion that time doesn't exist. Well, Aristotle had gone on further to consider that time was actually dependent on mind. And the key question of if there is no mind, will there be time or not, cannot be answered realistically, because if there is no one there to count, it cannot exist to be counted. Aristotle and others have demonstrated that time cannot exist independent from the events in which they occur, and we'll come back to that in a bit. So let's move forward in time to the 16th century. And whilst at the University of Pisa attending prayers at the cathedral, a young Galileo was watching the swinging altar lamps from the ceiling, hypnotised by their regular motion. No matter how large the arc, the lamps appeared to take the same amount of time to swing back and forth. And he confirmed his observations against the only reliable clock that he had on his person at the time, which was his pulse. So the machines at that time that could keep a reliable beat just didn't exist. And the clunky mechanical clocks that did exist would lose around 20 minutes of time every day and have to be reset by sundial readings every morning. The discovery of the swinging altar lamps would lead to him creating, over 50 years later, the first accurate, with any level of precision, clock, which was, of course, the pendulum clocks. Now, the ability to accurately measure time was a catalyst for the advancement of human society. Being able to measure time accurately to the second meant that navigation would also be more accurate, with improved ability to measure longitude, which are the lines that run perpendicular to the equator. So historically, sailors had navigated the seas with some trouble. Latitude could be easily measured by looking at the sky, but longitude was measured with two clocks. So one of those clocks was set at the time of the origin point, with the other being set to the local time on the ship. The difference between the two clocks told you your longitudinal position. So every 4 minutes of difference would equate to 1 degree of longitude, or 68 miles at the equator. Now, in clear weather, it was really, really easy to reset the clock on the ship. You could look at the position of the sun. The difficulty was with the origin clock. So with losing up to 20 minutes of time every single day, it just proved useless after day 2 of the journey. And it was in the following century that the nature of time was explored even further. So Sir Isaac Newton, writing in his Principia Mathematica, determined that actually time is absolute, meaning that it is an aspect of objective reality, independent of any observer, as well as that it progresses at a consistent pace throughout the universe and is measurable, imperceptible, and can only be understood mathematically. In other words, time was external to the universe. With this deterministic view, Newton believed that if you measured the interval between two events, it would take the same amount of time, regardless of whoever measured it, providing you used two good clocks. And this view underpinned the formulation of Newtonian mechanics, along with the concept of absolute space. So by systematizing and formalizing time, Newton was able to formulate his three laws of motion. Newton's views on absolute time persisted until the early 20th century, when a German-born patent office clerk stumbled across the theory of general relativity. So Einstein turned our conception of time on its head, and he actually wrote in his memoirs, Newton, Forgive Me, because his famous equation, E equals mc squared, is based on the premise that it is the speed of light that is absolute, not time. And Einstein realized that if the speed of light is invariable and cannot be exceeded, then space and time themselves must be flexible and relative to accommodate this. And this has been proven through scientific experimentation over and over again. So at this point, it's worth reflecting that throughout history, we have explored the relationship between space and time as dimensions of our reality. And explorations of what one is inevitably involve understanding what the other is, as we saw with the example of the clocks being used to navigate the seas. The relationship between space and time is so strong in our psyche that we actually cannot refer to one without the other. So, for example, when we wonder how long something is going to take, we're actually using a spatial adjective to describe time. Now, Einstein took this concept a step further and determined in his theory of special relativity that space and time are fused together into a four-dimensional continuum of space-time. And now we need to introduce an important force in our universe, which is gravity. The effect of gravity on space-time is so strong that it can bend space around on itself and slow time. Planets in our solar system aren't traveling in ellipses around the sun. They're traveling in a straight line along curved space-time. And time appears to run slower near a massive body like Earth because of the relationship between the energy of light and its frequency. So as light travels upwards in Earth's gravitational field, it loses energy. And that would mean that a clock at the bottom of a mountain is running slower than a clock at the top of the mountain. This has been proven through scientific experimentation again, and is subject to how we've got satellites in the sky using them for navigation as well. And it also forms the basis of a thought experiment known as the twins paradox. So one of the identical twins is sent into space in a rocket traveling at the speed of light, whilst the other remains on Earth. And when the spacefaring twin returns, she finds that her twin on Earth has aged more than she has. And if you've ever seen the movie Interstellar, you know that this is well demonstrated when the crew land on the planet near a massive black hole called Gargantua, where a single hour on its surface equates to 7 years in low orbit around the planet. So we use this constant, the speed of light, to measure large distances. Light years are the distance that light travels in a year, nearly 6 million miles. On a smaller scale, a meter is the length that light travels in 0.00000000003, even 3, 3, 5, 6, 4, 0, 9, 5, 2 seconds. I do know my numbers, honest. As measured by an atomic clock. With the introduction of the International System of Units, also known as SI units, a second, which is considered the base unit of time, is now measured as the duration of 9,192,631,770 periods of the radiation corresponding to the transition between two hyperfine levels of the ground state of the cesium-133 atom at rest at a temperature of 0 degrees Kelvin. Thank you. The point of explaining all of this is not necessarily to blow your minds with the science of time, but to show just how precise our measurements of time and distance have become through scientific advancements and through observations from the micro to the macro scale. And let's talk about this problem of measurement in more detail. It won't surprise you now when I say that the accuracy of the measurement depends on the accuracy of the equipment used to measure. So to illustrate this problem, let's briefly talk about how to measure the British coastline. So if the coastline is measured using units that are 100 kilometres long, the British coastline is 2,800 kilometres. However, if the unit of measurement is reduced to 50 kilometres, then the British coastline is 3,400 kilometres. That's 20% longer. So if we apply this to relativity, it should also come as no surprise that nobody actually knows the correct speed of light. We simply do not have equipment that powerful and precise to measure it. And so what we have instead is a theoretical approximation. And furthermore, that through experimentation in quantum physics, we're now questioning whether the speed of light is a constant after all. So quantum physics is where things start to get a little bit weird, and our understanding of what time is being turned on its head. This is our most accurate model of the universe today, particularly at the subatomic scales. And the theory states that aspects of the universe are quantized, that is, that they are composed of discrete, indivisible quanta. So, for example, light is composed of particles known as photons, which also sometimes behave like a wave, leading to the dual wave particle theory. So is time itself devised into quanta? It appears no. Instead, time is smooth and continuous. However, there is a theoretical unit of time known as Planck time, which is 10 to the minus 43 seconds, that could be the smallest unit of time, but as yet is beyond our ability to measure. So theories that look at combining quantum physics on the one hand and general relativity, which at unapproachable events like singularities within the black hole and the Big Bang itself appear to be impossible to unite, posit that time itself could be quantized. And within quantum physics, there are different interpretations of why these phenomena occur, such as the Copenhagen interpretation or the many worlds view. In the latter, there is no difference between a particle or a system before or after it has been observed. The observer herself is a quantum system, which interacts with other quantum systems with different possible versions seeing the particle or object in different positions, hence Schrödinger's cat. We're going to leave the science behind now with this simple quote from Stephen Hawking in A Brief History of Time. Space and time affect and are affected by everything that happens in the universe. So we've covered off the science, but what about the other side of the coin? What does religion and spirituality have to say about time? Now, I was brought up Roman Catholic, and time plays an important role in many of the teachings of Christianity, whether that's how God created the universe in 6 days, to the end times that will usher in the kingdom of God, where time is eternal. Now, confession time. I really struggled with Bible teachings growing up. I took them quite literally, and I thought that Christians were barking mad for believing in Genesis, especially when there was scientific evidence to the contrary. So it pushed me really hard into science, but not strictly atheism, because I always believed in a universal energy around us. And that really stemmed from me thinking about how at the time of my death, my body and all the matter in it would decompose into molecules and atoms and then be reabsorbed and reused in other organisms. So in that way, the particles and the energy that once comprised my body would be recycled. And there's a fundamental law of nature that says that matter cannot be created nor destroyed, it can only be transformed. So this notion of cyclic existence is what led me towards Buddhism. With, amongst other reasons, that was my motivation for going to India earlier in this year to learn more. So I'm not an expert teacher, as I said before, but I want to share some of my learnings here, just to provide a different perspective on time. So the Buddha, in his teachings on the Four Noble Truths, spoke about samsara, which is where we are trapped in cycling through the 6 realms of existence. And we're trapped because we don't understand the true nature of reality. We have a distorted view of reality, and that leads to suffering. And suffering comes in the form of mental afflictions. And Buddhists refer to the main ones as the 3 poisons, which are the ignorance around the true nature of reality, attachment and grasping, and aversion or hatred. So Buddhists for 2 millennia have been concerned with understanding what is reality. And this is where it gets really interesting, because this exploration of reality is what links quantum physics and Buddhism. So whilst I was in India, I was really fortunate to achieve one of my life goals, which was to meet the Dalai Lama at his residence in Dharamsala. He himself was meeting with Chinese scientists to talk about quantum physics. He has had a long interest in science. And in his book, The Universe in a Single Atom, describes his learnings with prominent scientists such as Francisco Varela, Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, and David Bohm. So what does Buddhism have to say about the nature of time? Well, the Sautrantika school in the 2nd century argued that time is not absolute. Sorry, Newton. And whilst it can be divided into past, present, and future, it is only the present moment that exists. The present moment does not possess any temporal thickness. So immediately after coming into existence, it passes out of existence. And furthermore, the Buddhist assertion is that past and present are just mental constructs. So the past is a memory and the future is a visualization. And both of these, memories and visualizations, are just thoughts. So thinking about the past can lead to aversion, whether that's regrets about things that you have done, or it could lead to attachment, wishing things were the way they once were. If you think about the future, that can lead to aversion in the form of anxiety about an event that hasn't yet happened. It can also lead to attachment in the form of wishing time away to get to that favoured event, like the Christmas party tonight. All of these mental afflictions steal your ability to enjoy what is actually the only thing that exists in our direct experience, the present moment, the now. Everything else is an illusion of the mind. So, if all that really exists is now, how can we make the most of our experience of it? So lots has been written about what happens when people experience flow, that mental state of operation where you're completely immersed in activity and lose all sense of space and time. And there are 6 factors that identify if you're in flow. So intense and focused concentration on the present moment, merging of action and awareness, a loss of reflective self-consciousness, meaning you become less aware of yourself, a sense of personal control or agency over the situation or activity, a distortion of temporal experience, as in one's subjective experience of time is altered, an experience of the activity as intrinsically rewarding. So what's interesting is that the third of this criteria, that loss of reflective self-consciousness, is what we were learning about in India when we were discussing the concepts of impermanence and emptiness. So to understand this, let's take a pen. Everyone would agree that this is a pen, but if I dismantle it into its constituent parts, is it still a pen? This is the Buddhist assertion around impermanence, that all objects, whether material or mental, are subject to continuous states of change. They are brought into being, created, they decline, and they are destroyed. The cells in your own body are not the same cells that you had at the start of your life. Your skin cells died over a month ago, and your stomach cells were replaced in the last week. So if you consider that, what are you? Absolutes are permanent and unchanging. So to go back to the pen, it cannot be permanent because I can change it. It's not permanent. And this is where the concept of dependent arising comes from, as a contrast to inherent existence, that all phenomena arise in dependence on other phenomena. And understanding this leads to a realization of emptiness. So the pen does not exist independent of me. Its existence depends on me. And when you realize this interconnectivity between observer and observed, this infinite loop between cause and effect, then you come to realize emptiness. Now, we can apply this to time. Time is also dependent arising. And this means that it does not exist of its own accord. It is relative to every single one of us. The past depends on our ability to remember, and the future depends on our ability to conceive in thought. So even now is dependent on us. This is where the power is, that we can change our own reality. So whether you believe in a God or you're an atheist, whether you're a student of science or faith, the only way that we can experience time is to feel it right now. Now is the only reality that we can connect with. And I believe that's why it's critical to live now. So in the concluding part of this talk, we will explore how we can make the most of now. Bronnie Ware was a palliative care nurse who worked with people and their families through the last weeks of their lives. And she observed that when we are faced with our own mortality, we go through periods of significant personal growth. And during this time, common themes emerge with the patients, regrets about how and where they have spent their lives. So let's run through them. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life that others expected of me. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish I'd had the courage to express my true feelings. I wish I'd stayed in touch with friends. I wish that I had let myself be happier. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. We do not yet understand what time is, though philosophy, science, and religion have all endeavoured to seek understanding and continue to do so. What we do know is that our time is short relative to the universe, and life is all about choices. So choose consciously, choose wisely, and choose honestly how you want to spend your time. Go after your dreams. Tell the people that you love them, and embrace happiness. Don't wait for some future time to do all of this, because the time is now.